Welcome. In this video we explain Section 30A of NEMA. It is a provision to circumvent the need for obtaining an environmental authorization to carry out a listed or specified activity, but it applies only to emergency situations. So we clarify what an emergency situation is and the procedure that needs to be followed when applying for this provision. Welcome. My name is Sean McGregor of ecoleges Environmental Consultants based in Mpumalanga, South Africa. And we're on a mission to empower all South Africans to protect their environment through the correct interpretation and application of our environmental legislation. So if you want to learn how our environmental law applies to you, how to avoid unnecessary and costly mistakes, if you want to increase your knowledge and skills to reduce your reliance on external consultants, if you want to earn CPD points, or you need mentorship, you're welcome to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to click on the bell notification icon so that you can be notified the moment we upload a new video. And please, if you do know of anyone else who can benefit, you can help spread the message by liking the videos. Thank you. We continue with the same series, Call of Duty, and the title of this video is Take Control, Emergencies. I will include a link to the National Environmental Management Act, including Section 30A relating to emergency situations, in the description below. In terms of Section 30A(1), the competent authority may, on its own initiative or on written or oral request from a person, direct a person, verbally or in writing, to carry out a listed or specified activity without obtaining an environmental authorization, to prevent or contain an emergency situation, or to prevent, contain or mitigate the effects of an emergency situation. Now, this provision is so important that everyone should be aware of it, because it allows a person in certain circumstances to immediately commence with emergency procedures or measures involving a listed or specified activity without having to wait for an environmental authorization. Just be warned, though, that this provision or exemption does not apply in the event of a person having already commenced with a listed or specified activity without an environmental authorization. That is why it is so critical for everyone, including their employees, to familiarize themselves with the procedure beforehand so that they can benefit from this provision when it is needed. And that is why it is so important to understand what constitutes an emergency situation. In terms of Section 30A, an emergency situation is a situation that has arisen suddenly, that poses an imminent threat to the environment, human health, or property. Now, this part of the definition is very similar to a Section 30 incident. However, the definition goes on to include a disaster defined in terms of Section 1 of the Disaster Management Act, Act number 57 of 2002, and it excludes incidents referred to in Section 30 of the National Environmental Management Act. I'm currently at the Waterval train disaster site, where 63 Mozambican workers tragically lost their lives on the 16th of November 1949. A disaster means a progressive or sudden, widespread or localized, natural or human-caused occurrence which A. causes or threatens to cause death, injury or disease, damage to property, infrastructure or the environment, or disruption to the life of a community, and is of a magnitude that exceeds the ability of those affected by the disaster to cope with its effects using only their own resources. The definition of an emergency situation is not necessarily limited to a disaster. Nonetheless, the definition infers that the scale of an emergency situation is synonymous to that of a disaster. Then, if you recall, it excludes Section 30 incidents, meaning it excludes the uncontrolled release of hazardous substances. Now, apart from being defined by scale, such as being synonymous with a disaster, or nature, such as excluding hazardous substance spills, an emergency situation is also defined by timing. Emergency situations apply to either existing or ongoing causes as well as the imminent threat to cause harm. In other words, it excludes harm that has already been done, as long as there is no potential to cause more harm. I further suspect then that it excludes or does not apply to remediation works after the damage is done. Section 30A emergencies are intended to empower persons to prevent the imminent or to immediately contain the existing, not to short-circuit remediation works after the effects have passed. Excuse the train in the background, it's passing on a subsequent bridge to this one. Right, so a person who requests the competent authority to direct a person in terms of section 30A must include in their request as a minimum, if you don't mind I'll read it, A, the nature, scope and possible impacts of the emergency situation, the listed or specified activities that will be commenced with in response to the emergency situation, the cause of the emergency situation, and finally the proposed measures to prevent or contain the emergency situation or to prevent, contain or mitigate the effects of the emergency situation. Now, the competent authority may then decide to direct a person to undertake specific measures within a specified time frame, once again to prevent or contain the emergency situation or to prevent, contain or mitigate the effects of the emergency situation. If it is a verbal directive, then it has to be confirmed in writing at the earliest possible opportunity, no later than 7 days. And if the competent authority decides not to issue a directive, perhaps they do not think that the situation constitutes an emergency, then that person may not commence with or continue that activity in the absence of an environmental authorization. There is a formal procedure that does need to be followed when submitting an oral request for a verbal directive. It is published in the regulations relating to the procedure to be followed when oral requests are made in terms of section 30A. It was published on the 10th of April 2015. Any person may submit an oral request to the competent authority for a verbal directive in terms of section 30A1 of the National Environmental Management Act. That is, to carry out a listed or specified activity without an environmental authorization in response to an emergency situation or disaster. Now, if you recall, the regulations will not apply to incidents, and they do not apply to events where a person has already commenced with a listed or specified activity without an environmental authorization. A person may only submit an oral request where an immediate commencement of the listed or specified activity is absolutely necessary in order to prevent or contain the emergency situation or its effects, and where the submission of a written request would defeat the objective of a verbal directive. The oral request must include the same minimum information I have already identified earlier. We further recommend that you take photographs of the emergency situation just in case the competent authority asks for them. Now, these situations can become very emotional, so you need to be absolutely certain that the oral request is not materially different from the facts. Otherwise, the competent authority can amend, suspend, or revoke the verbal directive. It's actually a criminal offence to knowingly, willingly, or even negligently provide incorrect or misleading information. The competent authority can refuse to issue a verbal directive and request that person to submit a written request if they believe that the reported circumstance is neither an emergency or a disaster or doesn't require immediate intervention. If the competent authority does agree to issue a verbal directive, then it has to be done within 6 hours of receiving all the required information. And the person who submitted the oral request must submit a confirmation in writing within 24 hours of that oral request. They can do that by hand, facsimile, or email. And then one last thing, just remember the competent authority also has to confirm their verbal directive in writing at their earliest opportunity, no later than 7 days. And that's it. Guys, I really hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch it. If you have joined the MPU and Corsi tiers of our membership program, then you'll receive an additional video. We go and search for similar provisions within the National Water Act to circumvent the need from obtaining a water use license and facilitate immediate prevention or containment of emergency situations involving a water resource. If you haven't joined our membership program yet, then check it out on Patreon. Otherwise, if you're looking for a consultant to help you with a once-off project, you're welcome to visit our website. Check out our previous video up here. We looked at Section 30 incidents. Very important to know the difference between an incident, duty and emergency. Next video, screening assessments. We explain them, a compulsory precursor to BAs and EIAs. Otherwise, subscribe, click on the bell notification icon. If you do know of anyone else can benefit, please like the video. Guys, thank you so much. Keep strong and God bless.